Hello, everyone. This is Clay Chase with Torrey Hills Capital, and welcome to the Ventripoint Diagnostics podcast for November 11th, 2020. Hope and trust you're all doing well under the circumstances, and here's hoping that with some of the recent news about the possible viable COVID-19 vaccine, that we'll be headed back to something that looks like normalcy again real soon. Now, since the company we're talking with today is very new to the Torrey Hills Capital family of companies, plus given the fact that they've been flying pretty much under the radar for the last 9 months or so, some of you might not be that familiar with them, which is why we're very excited to bring them to your attention today. Ventripoint Diagnostics is a commercial stage healthcare company that has developed an extremely valuable diagnostics platform which addresses a very large unmet need in the medical scanning market space. What this platform does, and it really is fantastic, is it enables the massive in-place fleet of two-dimensional ultrasound devices to create highly detailed and accurate three-dimensional views of the heart. Now, prior to the introduction of Ventripoint solution, really the only way to get this data was using MRI technology, an MRI. But the use of that equipment to perform this task had a number of significant drawbacks, which we will cover during this call today. And these limitations to using MRI to scan the heart have really swung the door wide open for Ventripoint to move this platform into the healthcare community in a big way, which we'll also be addressing during today's presentation. Now, following today's presentation, which lasts about 45 minutes, we'll have a short Q&A session. That being said, if you have a question during the presentation, simply click on the Q&A icon on the Zoom taskbar, type in your question, and we'll be sure that it gets addressed during the meeting. Now, during the Q&A portion of the presentation, if you'd like to ask a question online, simply click on the raise your hand icon. It's also on the taskbar. We'll enable your microphone. Remember that you'll have to turn your mic on as well so we can hear you. Also, post the presentation, we'll be sending you a brief survey to complete to give us your impressions on the company and key takeaways from today's meeting. It's important that you get the survey back to us in a timely manner so we can get that information back to the company. Okay, let's get started. Ventripoint Diagnostics trades on the OTC market under the ticker VPTDF, on the TSX Venture Exchange under the ticker symbol VPT. Ventripoint shares currently trading around 8 cents per share, representing a market cap of roughly $5.5 million. In other words, plenty of headroom here for shareholder appreciation as they step up sales volume of their systems, which they're doing right now. With us today to discuss Ventripoint Diagnostics and their growth strategy going forward is the company's Executive Chairman and CEO, Dr. George Adams. Hi, George. How are you today?
I'm well today, Clay. Looking forward to talking to people, answering questions.
Great. Well, we're glad you're here. Thanks for spending some time with us. The floor is now yours. Take it away.
Okay, well, so Ventripoint's all about getting a better look at your heart, a better way to analyze what we use right now worldwide, 2D ultrasound to analyze a heart. Next slide. I think are you, oh, okay.
Oh yeah, I'll go one more. Here we go. That one.
Okay, keep going.
That's the disclaimer. We'll send that to you in an email.
We are a publicly traded company, so I might make some forward-looking statements. Yes.
Fair enough. Okay, I think that's the one you're looking for.
Well, this is the one you usually do, but I'll be happy to do it for you. So we have about 110 million shares outstanding, fully diluted, and as Clay pointed out, we have a market cap of roughly $6 million US. So, and we've been through the FDA 3 times and got our product approved 3 times. So if I were any other company, I would have a market cap. If I were a pharmaceutical company, I'd have a market cap of 20 times this amount. So next slide. So let's get started here. You see on the left of your screen there, whoa.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah, there's some of those slides have automatic advances on it, so you're going to have to do that. So on the left-hand side, you see one chamber of the heart. This particular one happens to be the right ventricle of the heart, and you can see it rotating. So you can see that we generate 3-dimensional views and images of all 4 chambers of the heart. So that's a unique technology that we have. It's been FDA approved, European approved, Canadian approval, and as well as China approved. And we've already put in actually 10 clinical sites, and we have about 9 more that we want to do this year. So we'll talk a bit of some of those sites. We're entering into a growth phase where we're putting these machines out into hospitals, leading hospitals, and we expect that they will begin to talk to their colleagues about the usefulness of our machines, and that we'll be selling more and more machines next year. We hope to exit next year with about 80 to 100 units in place in top hospitals around the world. And there's lots of upside here, and we would see an attractive exit here, either to one of the big imaging companies, GE, Siemens, Philips, or probably a private equity opportunity as well. Next slide. So let's talk a bit about the market need. So 2D ultrasound, echocardiograms, is what everybody in the world uses to have a good look at your heart. If you don't, but what it doesn't provide is a really accurate volumetric measurements of any of the chambers of the heart. And specifically, it doesn't really do a good job on the right ventricle of the heart, which is mostly important to people with children who have heart problems, because if you're born with a heart problem, it's usually the right side of the heart. And it's the hardest part to image, and it's the hardest part to analyze. And so these children end up going into MRIs over and over again. And that's a very traumatic thing for them, as well as their parents. So what we, current ultrasound doesn't really give you a standardized metric across all the different scans that you have. And it doesn't work that well on the way that they analyze 2D ultrasounds now. About anywhere from 8 to 25% of people give you quite blurry images. So if people are, some people are what we call echogenic, give us really pretty pictures. And some people are not echogenic, which means they give us very blurry pictures. And so it's difficult to analyze those using conventional techniques. And as Clay mentioned, we have, the only way to really get good information about the heart is to put you into an MRI machine for anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours, and make you, absolutely motionless in there for that period of time. You're all the way in, very claustrophobic, very noisy. And every time you want to take a slice of the magnets keep moving, making lots of noise. And when it's time to take a slice through your heart, then you have to hold your breath, and they take the picture. They take about 45 pictures in an hour and a half. So it's a pretty long and arduous procedure, very expensive. And, there are better things you can do with an MRI machine than spend an hour and a half doing one patient. It does require that you be injected with contrast media, and often people have to be sedated just to be able to stay in there that long and be able to go finish the procedure. Next slide. Next slide, Clay, please.
Yes. There we go.
Okay.
Sorry. It has a mind of its own.
I see.
I have a quick question, George.
Yes. Yes.
In an MRI, you say a lot of times it has to be sedated. Does that sometimes change the data? Doesn't it seem like it would alter what your heart's doing?
Sometimes it can change it a little bit, but you're usually looking for some pretty significant defects in a heart when you're going to an MRI machine. I mean, you wouldn't, it's not, you're looking for mountains, not molehills. So, I mean,
understood.
I think the problem is we can't, even with the ultrasound in these people, the images are just so pure, you're just totally guessing at what you're looking at, which is why you have to go in the MRI. Our technology is based on an artificial intelligence approach that was developed at the University of Washington in Seattle, called knowledge-based reconstruction. And basically, we are able to take these 2D slices, and because we have a crystal that we put on the probe. So you'll see in the picture, in the center of the picture, we have an operator here who's scanning somebody's heart, and they have a probe in their right hand there, right at the foreground of the picture. And there's 2 wires. Normally they have 1 wire kind of that. The first wire, that wire goes back to the ultrasound machine. The second wire is a wire that goes back to our machine, which is the one behind Jim there, who's the operator. the little screen at the back is the Ventripoint. You can see it on the left-hand side of the screen. You'll see that that's what the Ventripoint equipment looks like right now. Most of the magic here is in the software, in the artificial intelligence, but we do track exactly where the probe is so that we can figure out exactly where the plane was, the image that was taken with the 2D. And so when we start to analyze it, we can put all normal 16 views of a heart together properly so that we can build an accurate three-dimensional model of the heart. Next slide.
Great.
So here's some examples of slices through the heart, standard images. If you were a cardiologist, you would know exactly where the heart is in these images and where the wall was and where the valves were. But of course, to you and me, it just looks like a bunch of black and white images. But what we do, go ahead, next slide, is we can go in and identify little spots on there, not too many, in some cases 4 or 5 identifying 4 or 5 things on any of the 16 views would allow us to do an accurate reconstruction. Something as complicated as a right ventricle, which is what you see on the screen here, would take about 14 to 18 points to be able to get an accurate result, but that's not difficult to do with our technology. Next slide. So you get out, after you do the analysis, you get the standard metrics that you would get out of same numbers you would get out of an MRI. Of course, the MRI, as I've explained, it costs millions of dollars to buy one. You spend hours in there getting the images. You spend, and then the radiologist has to spend anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes getting them, and then they send that information over to the radiologist, and finally you get an answer. In our case, because we've attached our system to a 2D ultrasound machine, and every cardiologist has a 2D ultrasound machine, for $50,000 and 5 minutes of scanning, immediately you can have the technologist do the analysis. It takes, I say 10 minutes on a slide. Actually, it's down to about 5 minutes. And then the cardiologist can look at it in a couple of minutes. He can make an assessment and decide what to do with the patient. And that can all be done in the first appointment at the cardiologist's office, instead of having to have 3 appointments where you see the cardiologist, wait for 2 or 3 months, get an appointment in the MRI, then wait for another couple of weeks, 3 weeks, get another appointment with the cardiologist, which is what they do now. Next slide. So we have, over the years, we've been a long time doing this. We've been 10 years plus perfecting this machine. We've been through the FDA 3 times. The first one was to just do the right ventricle alone. And the second time we went through was to do all 4 chambers of the heart. And the last time we went through, just last year, we were able to approve a new tracking system and a new configuration of the machine, so that and it's much more user-friendly, much less costly to manufacture, and it's being very well received by the cardiologists who have it. The 10 cardiologists who have the machines now are enjoying using them. Next slide. So the key markets that we've been going after are congenital heart disease. As I said, if you're born with a heart problem, it's always the right side of the heart. If you have a problem with the left side of your heart, you don't get born. So all the pediatric cardiologists in the world are focused on the right side of the heart. More and more regular adult cardiologists are beginning to focus on the right side of the heart, because the right side of the heart contains the key information as to whether you're going to have a heart attack in the future, whether you're going to have various things that are going to happen to you, and the degree with the heart is suffering with whatever the underlying condition is. So analyzing the right heart is now becoming and very important. In fact, standard of care, which is developed by the American Society of Echocardiography and the American Heart Association and the European Society, requires that everybody who has a cardiac echo done on them should have the right side analysis done. But of course, the cardiologists don't do that now because it's too difficult, and so they aren't actually following the guidelines. And the other, another area that we've targeted is the cardiotoxic effects of chemotherapy. So 20 to 30% of people who go through chemotherapy come out the other side with a heart problem, a chronic heart disease. And in fact, the American Heart Association put out a scientific statement a couple of years ago saying that if you've been through chemotherapy and your cancer is in remission, you should now go see a cardiologist, because you are more likely to die from a heart problem than from the original cancer. and they
Wow.
they have access to hundreds of thousands of cases to validate that statement. So so that's a big application area for us. You may have been following with what's going on with COVID-19, but basically the virus is damaging both the right and left side of the heart, mostly the right side of the heart. So we're now seeing 40 to 60% of people have damaged hearts, even when they've been asymptomatic with COVID. And in fact, and we don't know what's going to happen with these patients, but they have dilated, enlarged hearts, which is, of course, we measure volumetric measurements. So we are the perfect tool to evaluate a COVID patient to see whether they're going to, what happens. It's too early now to see whether those people are going to progress and that heart's going to continue to be damaged, or whether it will heal itself and come back. But we're now doing some clinical studies on COVID patients, so we should have some information shortly.
Hey, George.
Mm-hmm.
You talk a lot about the right side of the heart. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the right side of the heart does? It seems like it's very important, and it's more easily affected by some of these disease states, or?
Right. So the right side of the heart pumps the blood through your lungs and over to the left side of your heart. The left side of the heart is the high pressure side that pumps it out. So it's a serial pump. It's like a chain. You can die from heart failure if the right side stops pumping, then you'll die from right heart failure. If the left side stops pumping, then you die from left heart failure. But you can still die from either side dying. The thing normally, it takes very little muscle to push the blood over through the lungs. There's very little resistance to blood going through the lungs. And so the muscle on the right side is paper thin, as opposed to the muscle on the left side is like as big as your thumb, thick as your thumb. So it's, and in both cases, when the heart starts to struggle, the first thing it does is get bigger. And so the first indication that the heart is struggling for something, whether it's volume overload, pressure overload, ischemia, whatever the underlying issue is, the first thing it does is get bigger, because it's easier to pump when it's bigger. And so that's what we measure, size. So we are able to detect very early on when the right, the left, or both sides are struggling.
Oh, that's great. Okay, thanks.
No problem. And that, well, just to follow up on one more piece of it, the concern with the COVID patients, because you're looking at, the large fraction of them have dilated right ventricles acutely shortly after they've had COVID. And in fact, there's a correlation between the size of your right ventricle and whether you're going to die from COVID or not. So the more your heart dilates, the more likely you are to die from COVID. We know from other diseases where you have enlarged right ventricles that the longer you leave that heart enlarged like that, the less likely the right side is able to remodel or recover or shrink back down to a normal size. So it's quite a big concern right now is, how long can we let these patients go on without treating them, hoping their right ventricle will normalize.
And that really illuminates the value of your system, because it allows these clinicians and cardiologists the ability to look at the heart more often, probably, and a lot more easily based on the availability of ultrasound equipment versus MRI equipment. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, absolutely. That's the whole point. The whole point is you can do an ultrasound every 3 months. No insurance company is going to pay for you to have an MRI every 3 months. So, basically the doctors are forced, they look at the echoes, they scratch their heads about, well, what's really going on. And every 2 or 3 or 4 years, they're able to order an MRI and have it paid for. Whereas they have to go for years really not knowing what the situation is. And one of the conditions that we know, where we know a lot about what happens to the right side of the heart, is pulmonary hypertension. So that's a case where you have congested lungs, just like you get with COVID. The heart dilates, and then eventually you die from right heart failure in pulmonary hypertension. That can happen very quickly. That can happen in 9 months. Again, we know from other conditions that when the right heart starts dilating, you need to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Great.
So so those are the target areas. As I said, there's value in measuring right side and left side accurately in every case, but this is where the value is specifically meritorious. Next slide. So we all know heart disease is still the leading cause of death in men and women. It doesn't select out. And it's critical to get these measurements. There are, $1.4 billion of echo equipment sold every year. So there's, people are constantly renewing, upgrading their echo equipment. And of course, in the United States, there's about $200 billion a year spent annually on cardiovascular care and treatment. So they're all big numbers. The chance to change and make that more efficient is where the company is at. So some of our more recent installations is one in October, we put a machine into MD Anderson Cancer Center. You may remember I said cancer, post chemotherapy for cancer was one of our big applications. So, MD Anderson is the #1 cancer hospital in the world. It has been ranked #1 or #2 for the last 30 years. And the head cardiologist there was very excited to get our machine and get started looking at patients to see whether he can either, sort people into people who are starting to get chronic heart problems during the therapy and maybe change the therapeutic regime a little bit, or, just being able to monitor the people who have a heart problem because they've been through chemotherapy on a regular basis and detect the ones that are starting into more severe disease and be more aggressive in treating those patients. The other one is Erasmus Sophia Hospital in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. That's the #1 cardiovascular hospital in Europe. And the doctors there are going to use the machine for a routine basis on children and adults to quantify the heart mechanics in difficult cases. Next slide. One thing I'll just say, we also just announced that we put a machine into the Peter Monk Cardiac Center in Toronto in Canada. That's the #1 hospital in Canada. So in the last 5 weeks, we put machines into the #1 hospital in Europe, the #1 cancer hospital in the world, and the #1 hospital in Canada. So we're following through on the idea of, getting these machines into key opinion leaders and having them publish and talk about how this is enabling them to treat their patients more effectively. And then, by referral, we will see more sales coming forward. So we also have a plan to host some regional webinars for people. So the key opinion leaders, once they get a few more cases under their belts, we'll have webinars and invite all cardiologists to come and listen to these very illustrious cardiologists talk about a case or two of exactly why our machine, how they effectively used it. So we already have a couple of those be planned soon. And then we're also looking at sponsored webinars to specific groups like the Adult Congenital Heart Association. It's a group who has a whole bunch of cardiologists who are specifically concerned about congenital heart disease. And so they would be able to put together a webinar and have 200 or 300 of those cardiologists on the webinar, and we could bring our expert in CHD on, and they could present that to that base. So all of this will increase how we mark our awareness and bring sales. So that's our marketing plan. Pretty normal, tried and true. This is how you bring an innovative, disruptive device into the marketplace. Yeah.
How soon do you expect to get some of these key opinion leaders to start publishing or discussing your system in, at symposiums or white paper or medical journal?
Well, we have one of them, Dr. Windrum out in Mazankowski in Edmonton, has got 2 papers he's submitting right now and he's put an abstract, I think, into the American Society meeting. The meetings typically are in the spring and the summer, not this time of the year. So, because the research world kind of runs along with the academic world, and so normally at this time of the year, the academic world is consuming a lot of people's time, but not so much this year. I would say, COVID is slowing everything down. It's hard to predict anything timeline with COVID. We hear often from our users that they're now on rotating staff. They can only have a third of the staff in the echo lab at one time. All this kind of changes and things. So I would say certainly by spring, we'll have a bunch of those webinars up and running and some really nice case studies. I hope to have some COVID case studies before the end of the year, so we can talk about how the machine is able to do a better job assessing COVID patient cardiac complications of COVID, and maybe even some therapeutic outcomes. So that, that would be a very well attended webinar for sure.
That's great. We're looking forward to that. We have a question from one of our attendees. Paul, go ahead.
Yes, it's great you're getting into hospitals with your medical device. I have one company that also is doing something with the heart, and they've had a long time. They've been in some of the major hospital facilities, and they still have no sales. So I'm just wondering if it's COVID that's slowing it down. They supposedly have, some really good results, and they are supposed to get sales this year, and we're already into November, and they don't have one sale yet. And I'm just kind of wondering if you're running into the same kind of thing where you're in the hospitals with the devices, and I don't know what the springboard is to get them to start using the device on a paying basis. And are you talking to them now about that to see, because you have a big jump in sales for next year, and I'm just wondering what the sales process is to get those sales completed.
Right. So we've been at this for a while. MD Anderson, Erasmus, Edmonton, Toronto, Sick Kids all paid for their machines. So, I mean, these are all sales. They're not just installations. So we had two revenue models, and we'll get there. One's a capital purchase and one's a lease and a pay-per-use model. Certainly the capital purchase model is a very difficult thing. You have to get 25 people in the hospital to sign off on the capital purchase. You've got to go into a budget line. It's got to be a line budget item. Then budget has to get approved, and yet your item has to be above the cutoff line. It's a very long process in a hospital. It's probably 18-month process to buy a piece of capital in today's world. And certainly COVID has missed that up, because now the purchasing departments have only got enough time to deal with COVID-related purchases. So anything special like the purchase of a brand new machine is like, forget it. We can't deal with that. So these purchases that have been putting out now are ones that were in the queue before COVID got here, and we're just filling those purchase orders now. We are getting a much better interest and promises purchase orders on the lease model in the United States. And we'll go through that. But one of the reasons is because we already have a CPC code. There already is a reimbursement code to do this procedure. Anybody who buys a machine and does the procedure gets paid anywhere from $100 to $250 extra to do this procedure over and above the standard fee you would get from doing the 2D ultrasound, the echocardiogram. So it becomes a profit center right away. And so we were finding that offering to lease it to them and then charge them $45 every time they use it is a much easier pathway for getting these machines into hospitals and imaging clinics in the United States. So I don't know what your other business is and whether it's a capital purchase business or what, but it is a very long sales cycle if you're trying to do capital equipment. Not so much in Canada and Europe, but everybody, COVID is causing purchasing departments to move incredibly, even more slowly than normal. Yep.
Yeah, no, it's been I know it's a long process. And so I think they might be trying different ways to get in instead of a pure purchase, because that takes a long time. So right. I'm just wondering they're in the Mayo Clinic and some other hospitals too. So, but after 3 years, and I met the salespeople and they still haven't closed the sale. So, that's, it's been in the testing phase. So,
Well, we're closing sales. We've been very, the thing that slowed our sales down was not so much the need, but how user friendly and how well the system fit into the normal flow of patient flow in a cardiac department. And we fixed all that. We took the opportunity when COVID came to modify the machine in a number of ways to make it much easier to install, easier to use, sort of guides the sonographer and the analyst through the process now. It used to take us 10 minutes to do an analysis. Now we're down to about 2.5 minutes. We have a bunch of guides in there, automatically puts points on and things. So, every minute counts. And, there, as I said, the early returns on the 10 machines that are out there is that you fixed all the problems. We just want to get on with using this. As you realize, though, echocardiography units all over the world are also under some kind of restricted use, emergency use, only use them. So they're running at about 1/3 of normal business in these places because of COVID. And one of the other interesting phenomena that's going on in the United States is that whereas the strip mall imaging clinics were doing a number of echocardiograms over the last decade or so, all of those things have been sort of fading out of doing echocardiograms, and we're going to move those over to the hospital because the hospital gets paid more to do those procedures than the strip clinic. And so the hospital just went around buying up all the cardiac imaging centers all around the hospital and bringing the business inside because they could make more money at it. So of course, now with COVID, nobody wants to go to the hospital to have their echocardiogram done. So it's reversed the flow. And now the patients want to go to a remote clinic and have their echocardiogram done. So now we're starting to focus more on remote clinics rather than hospitals. So that is a much faster process because they are driven by, they know exactly what it costs to run a procedure, what they get paid and all that stuff. So they're very much quicker sale on the lease model to a remote imaging clinic.
yeah, well, it's good your technology's keeping the time frame down of what the patient has to go through, because this other company, you have to go to a cath lab for where the regular heartbeat is, and they've cut it down significantly, but they don't have any sales yet. So that's also good for the patient. But this is the technology trying to help the patient and make the time shorter.
Yes, time is important, and we do shorten the time, but reliability and accuracy of the results are trump time every time. And one of the things you see now is that hospitals more and more are going to contrast media. So even in the echo, remember I told you you have to use contrast in an MRI to get good images. You don't have to use contrast, but when you get blurry images with using the ultrasound systems, you then can go to where they inject contrast media into you while they're doing the ultrasound. And hospitals in the United States have gone from doing that 10 to 20% of the time. Some of them now are up to 100%. And the numbers of them are in the 40 to 50% range. So, that takes an extra 20 minutes. So you say to yourself, well, why would you spend an extra 20 minutes doing an ultrasound on somebody when you could just kind of squint at the original images and take your best guess? Well, doctors have gotten in a lot of trouble squinting and taking their best guess. And so now they're gun shy about that. So they spend the extra 20 minutes and the cost of the ultrasound, of the contrast media, and the cost of a nurse to come down and actually put a needle in somebody's arm so you can inject the contrast media. And most of the time you need the nurse injecting the contrast media while the ultrasonographer is taking the images. Very hard to do both at the same time. And that's all because they want more accurate and more reliable results. So, and that's what we give them. We give them more accurate and more reliable results, whether they're analyzing the original ultrasound image or the one they've done with the contrast media. We get the same answer regardless. So we can actually eliminate the use of contrast media. But when we went to the various centers and said, we can eliminate, you don't have to use contrast media anymore, you can get good results without it, they said, we'll just do your analysis on contrast media because that will give us even better results. So, it's more, right now the cardiology world is more concerned about getting better and more reliable results, not time.
Great. Thanks, Paul. We have another question, kind of along maybe a similar line. I'm going to we have some financial questions. We're going to get to those when we go to the financial section. But is your device similar to the existing nuclear application being used now? Are you familiar with
No,
that?
no. If you're using nuclear as a PET, use nuclear exams to look at metabolic activity, not structure and function. So,
Got it. Okay.
ultrasound doesn't do nuclear studies are around metabolic issues. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then another kind of, not a follow-up, but this is a kind of a good question. Is there a razor blade portion of your business model?
Yeah, what we call lease and a pay-per-use, or you would call razor and razor blade approach. Yes. So what was the question?
Yes, that does. So yeah, and then you also have the crystal as part of the razor blade as well, right?
Yeah. So we also
band
now
takes a
have
crystal.
a disposable crystal that you put on the patient with the ECG lead, and that you would throw away. So you have to purchase a new crystal each time you use the machine. And that's built into the cost of if you're leasing the machine and on pay-per-use, then that's built in. If you bought the machine and you're using it without paying every time you use it, then you have to buy a crystal for each time that you want to use it. And on top of that, there's also a annual. If you purchase a machine, there's an annual 10 to 15% of the original cost annual fee for accessing the databases and maintenance on the hardware and support. So there's ongoing revenue. Every time you sell or lease a machine, there's ongoing revenue forever. Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's get into the financial section. I think it's the next part of the presentation here.
Okay, so if you just look at those targeted areas that we were talking about before, leaving COVID out of the equation, oncology, pulmonary hypertension, and congenital heart disease, you're looking at roughly about 40,000 machines out there right now, 2D ultrasound machines that are used to treat those, to deal with those patient populations in US, Canada, and Europe. So that's our target market. At $50,000, if the capital purchase market calls for $50,000 to purchase it, and then anywhere from $500 to $7,500 a year of maintenance plus cost of crystals. So that's in excess of a $2 billion market. Next. So the revenue models, as I said, we have two, depending on what jurisdiction we're in. The capital purchase one works well in Canada and Europe, and the lease one works very well in China and United States. And so the pay-per-use one is $15,000 a year. You get the first 200 cases for that, and then after that, it's $50 a case, $45 for the case, and $5 for the crystal. And as I said, there is a CPC code, a reimbursement code, which we validated through the American Society of Echocardiography that what we do, creating a 3D model from a 2D scan, is exactly what that code calls for. And so we can get repaid anywhere from $100 to $200, which allows you to a very quick break even on the equipment. Next slide.
Okay, and we have a kind of a question that's right around this, but hold on, it did not go to the next slide. Here's the next slide. We'll ask that question in a sec.
Well, as I said, we have a number of places in the United States are in different processes of acquiring the equipment. We put the first of the new versions in MD Anderson. We have 5 other sites who are in the process of generating purchase orders for us to go and put them in. COVID has affected their ability to do that. Some places we actually have a purchase order, but they're saying, don't come right now. We're too busy with COVID. Our hospital's shut down. So eventually we will get those in. In the UK, we have Evelina, which is a major children's hospital in London, is going to get a machine. There's a bunch. Actually, we shipped a machine to the UK this morning. So there'll be another announcement in probably next week saying we've installed another one in a #1 ranked hospital in the UK.
Great.
And we're also looking at, Geneva Children's Hospital has been a user of our equipment for a number of years. They have a version 2 and they want a version 3. So they've already sent us a purchase order for that version 3. So yeah, so we are continuing to see units come in. We put 3 units into China. Our Chinese partners purchased those units from us, and they put them into 3 major hospitals in China on a demonstration level. They've also in the process set up a distribution center all through China. So China is an interesting market. We decided that didn't have, being a small company, we weren't about to go to China ourselves. So we found a partner there who's been able to raise funds and build a manufacturing facility in China so they can manufacture the equipment. We manufacture our own equipment here in Toronto in our facility. They're going to manufacture their own equipment for China in China. And they built a national distribution network. They already have hundreds and hundreds of units pre-sold. They're just finishing up some detailed discussions with the government on how to roll this out in China. China's an interesting situation, whereas we have in the Western world, in Canada, United States, about 14% of hospital admissions are for cardiac complications, cardiac issues. In the United States, in China, it's 23%. So it's almost twice as many people in a hospital at any point in time in China with a heart problem than we do here. And we think we have a big problem with heart disease in Canada and the United States. Well, China has twice as big a problem. So it's a very large market. So yeah, basically we have a pipeline of material. We'll get them out the door. We're targeting to get to 80 to 100 installs by the end of next year. And we're on target for that.
One of the questions, George, is when do you think, at what sales level or penetration would you feel that you could move the company up to the NASDAQ exchange? Is that something that you're contemplating or would contemplate at the right time?
Oh, sure. I mean, all Canadian companies, biotech companies, want to move up to a U.S. exchange, and NASDAQ's the obvious one. We would have to meet the metrics for NASDAQ. So, we would need to have a few $1 million in sales, which should happen next year. So, I think we would be eligible to move up to NASDAQ middle to third quarter next year. And we will certainly talk to our bankers and see if that's something that's is a good idea. It doesn't always go well for Canadian companies to move up to NASDAQ. Sometimes it's quite punishing to existing shareholders. So we would have to find a very good banker who would take us around and make sure that we were going to have a good, that our proposition was well understood and that the share price would be accretive to our existing shareholders.
Yep, makes sense. So the next slide here.
So, we're talking about next year having something just from the North American market. We're being very conservative here, saying we're going to get 45 machines out next year and have 60 in North America by the end of next year. I think that's doable with the lease model. The lease model is a little less, you lease it for $15,000 and then they pretty much can use it for 3 or 4 months without having to pay anything. And then they have to start paying on a pay-use basis. So, it takes a while for that revenue to come in. So these are the projections that we have based on fundamentally a leasing model. Next slide.
I think there's some Europe ones on the next slide. Here's the
Europe one. Europe's slightly less because it's a capital model, but slightly less machines, but more sales, more capital sales, less leasing. And so we would see an additional, $600,000 or $700,000 from there. So we're talking about $1.5 million to $2 million of revenue next year. But then, that's just building the base and getting it out into the KOLs and getting the whole cardiology world to understand the value of being able to do what we do so quickly and easily and getting accurate and reliable results. So we have a bit of, messaging to do yet. Exit. Well, I mean, in this industry, everybody who gets up there into the 80 to 100 installations, and especially in maybe, even maybe lower if you're in top hospitals, gets acquired. Philips just bought a company called TomTech, which they paid about 3 years ago. They bought TomTech, who had not a very large base of installs, but they were able to get north of $100 million for that company. Again, we're trading around $6 million, so that would be a big upgrade, a big value increase for us. And I actually think we've talked to other people like Precision Imaging Circle and McKesson. These are people who are service providers who already have thousands of customers that they provide software tools to allow them to improve their efficiency, improve the analysis or improve the efficiency of the operations. And so they would be natural partners for us or natural acquirers for us, because what you could simply add our software into their existing estate software and immediately offer it up to their thousands of customers as a better way to do analysis of ultrasound. So, we're growing our sales. We have recurring revenues and we have great margins, 80% plus margins. So, those are the metrics that the large people look at to say, this is an emerging company. We should get it now. So, I mean, Fuji bought Sonosite, for $1 billion. I mean, the takeouts in this space go for anywhere from about 100 million to $1 billion.
So one of the questions was, could you go over your current kind of financial capacity? You just raised some money recently. What's your runway and things like that?
Yeah, we raised $500,000 in September, and we've had some other money come in. So we have about a 9-month runway right now, which should be quite adequate to get us into sales next year. And our burn rate is very low. We are basically a software company at this point, where we manufacture the equipment, but we don't manufacture it until we get an order. So I'm wondering, we're feeling quite comfortable about our position right now. We would take some money into the company to extend that runway on the right terms, but we're not in a rush to do that.
Good. Well, it sounds like you're well positioned here for the next leg of the journey, building the sales pipeline further, getting more installations, getting some of the feedback from the KOLs. Certainly a great time to be looking at the company as far as an investment. Can you tell us more about your team and have you done this before, or is this your first rodeo, as they say?
This is my 7th time around. I've been at this developing and commercializing medical devices and therapies for 40 years. Over those years, all the things that I brought to market are still used worldwide, and they've been used up to 300 million times. 300 million people have benefited from the technology that I brought to market. So, I'm a well-established serial entrepreneur in the medical space. Desmond Herzon is a superstar engineer with 20 years experience in ultrasound and all the manufacturing and everything. He was the vice president of engineering for Sonosite. We stole him away from Sonosite. He was the one who developed our latest version of the software and the hardware, and he gets full credit for really addressing all the little issues, usability issues, and that have now gone away, and why the cardiologists who have the machines are very much enjoying them. Elvira is our head of everything, operations and regulatory for us and quality assistance. She's been at this for a number of years. She's absolutely fantastic at what she does in every way. And we've been so lucky. We've been through the FDA 3 times, the CE mark 3 times, the Health Canada 3 times, and she's just done a marvelous job making it all work. We get audited every 3 or 4 months by somebody or other, ISO or FDA, or somebody comes to audit us every 3 or 4 months, and we pass with flying colors every time. So I can't say anything more. And Dave McFedrin has had many long 30 years of selling capital equipment to hospitals, and he was the head of sales for Siemens, one of the big 3, and so we are very very happy to have Dave. Next slide. So what can I say? It's a $2 billion opportunity. I believe we substantially de-risked it by producing a device which works really well and has been through regulatory. And we're on our way. We have the funding we need to go forward and make the sales and show adoption. And that's really our challenge right now, is to show adoption by the KOLs, who will then do the webinars for us and recommend the system to other cardiologists. So we are well on our way on that cycle and feel very confident about that. because we have a good team and we've done it before. And we're currently, as I said, we're currently at a $6 million valuation. We should be north of 100 for sure. And we'll get there very quickly once we start showing adoption in the marketplace.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, George. This is exactly the type of company that we look for in the world of investing that's underfollowed, underappreciated. The stock is nowhere near where it should be in terms of the disconnect. And we're excited that you're being able to present to investors at this market cap stage, because it seems to us that the device has tremendous value. There's a big bottleneck in the system for cardiologists to see what's going on in someone's heart. They're frustrated by their inability to order these MRIs on a regular basis, I'm sure. And this is just a fantastic tool for them to really get this almost like look right inside your chest and see what's going on in your heart, and make critical management or critical care decisions for their patients. It just looks like a great product. And I know that those ones will be really successful.
It's been taken, it's not for the faint of heart to try and change the way medical health care is practiced, especially the number one disease in the Western world, heart disease, or worldwide, number one disease. So, to change the way things are done takes some time and effort, but we are well down that pipe now, and we feel we've got this. We know from talking to the KOLs, we have the solution they need to address their problems. In fact, we're, on the we have a bunch of projects on our development being led by these leading cardiologists saying, well, if you can do that, make it do this, or you can do that, make it do this. So we have a whole bunch of these, wow, you can do that, make it do this projects in the pipeline, which you'll hear about in the next 6 months or so. And that's going to completely revolutionize how echocardiography is done, and what kind of information is available to really decide what's going wrong with this person's heart, and then of course it's up to the cardiologist to decide what the appropriate therapy is. But they're struggling now to get the diagnostics right, and we have the solution for that problem.
Sure. No, it really looks ideal. I've got a quick announcement. Today's code word for your feedback report is bluefin. Again, it's bluefin, like the tuna. So write that down. You'll need that. And then, as I was just saying, I mean, it just seems like every now and then we get to see a company at this early stage that has, you're in there. This is the final version, pretty much, of this device. This has gone through a number of iterations to get it just right. You've received a tremendous amount of feedback from the cardiologists in the field that work with a prior variant of the system. And now it just seems like it works really well. And now it's just ramping up those sales, getting the recognition with the KOLs. And then these franchises do sell up they get acquired. Siemens, GE, Samsung, those guys want to own this technology. So I think you're in a very, very good position. Anyone that's looking at this as an investment at a $5 or $5.5 million market cap is very, very low. With their sales ramping now, I think that we'll see this thing significantly change in market value over the next couple of quarters as the market starts to realize what you have. Couldn't be more excited about where you are.
Well, I think you got it. I mean, you got the message. So yeah, we are very, very excited to have our machines out there in these top places and have these top cardiologists using them. We anticipate, shortly after Christmas, they'll start telling all their friends about it. They've agreed to come and do the webinars and present cases. They've agreed to introduce us to their colleagues at the other top hospitals all over the world. So, there may be 50,000 cardiologists in the world, but they all kind of know each other a little bit. And certainly the top guys all know each other because they all spend so much time together on the podium talking at one conference or another. I know when I was the top scientist in the world in artificial hearts, we all met 10 times a year at one conference or another. We was just to guess who's going to speak first this time. So we all got to know each other pretty well because we were always at this, giving the keynote talk. Yeah.
Well, there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And this is, I think, time, because I just went through an MRI it was more than an hour MRI. It's very difficult. I know it was very expensive relative to what your system's overhead would be. So I think it's a great thing. So we're going to we're getting close to wrapping up here. I want to see if there's any additional questions from anyone that's listening in. If you'd like to ask a question, you can either just type it into the Q&A portion of the taskbar. You could raise your hand down there, and we'll put your mic on, and you can ask the question online here. Fairly straightforward presentation. For us, a lot of times it's about, do we understand it? A lot of times we look at healthcare or biotech, we really can't quite understand some of these monoclonal antibody therapies, but this is something that we really do understand well. It just gives the physicians and the cardiologists the information that they need to determine what's going on with our hearts, which is such a critical key part of our health. So especially with COVID coming on, this adds a whole new layer of value to what you're putting in the marketplace.
Yeah, I hope COVID, the initial heart damage corrects itself, but history has said that's not likely. So yeah, I think we're going to have a whole lot of new cases to follow for the rest of their lives, and scanning their right heart every 3 months to see. And we know, again, from pulmonary hypertension that you can be stable for month, and in a period of 6 months, you can go from having a more or less normally functioning right heart, enlarged but still functioning, to something which is absolutely done. So you cannot do it every 6 months. You got to scan them every 3 months, because you can go from good to very bad in a 6 month period. So,
short order.
It's really not. And so once these 40% of people have had COVID, whether they had symptoms or not, are identified with enlarged right ventricles, then they really need to be scanned every 3 months until that ventricle comes back to being a normal size. That could be tens of millions of people. I mean, it's 40% incidence right now. We've how is it 50 million people worldwide who've had COVID already. Wow. That's 20 million people today who should have a cardiac ultrasound done on them to see whether they have the kind of heart damage that, well, all 50 million need to be done, but 20 million of them will have damage to their heart and need to be followed 3 months later to see whether that damage has been reversed or whether it's getting worse.
Getting worse, right?
That's not going, and you cannot do that in any other way but an MRI. Well, you're not about to put 50 million people in an MRI. There are not enough MRI machines in the world to put 50 million in an MRI. And most of the people with COVID infections are not in jurisdictions which have a lot of MRIs anyway. So, this could be an overwhelming application for our technology. It's emerging, it's developing. So as I said, we'll know, and we'll have data in a few weeks on exactly what's going on with COVID patients.
Right. We had almost an hour-long conversation a week or two ago, George, just about how people with just simple hypertension, high blood pressure, could benefit from being scanned, right?
Yes. Well, I pride myself in saying that the stuff I've brought to market has been used over the last 40 years on 300, extend the lives of 300 million people. And something that's artificial, all the way from artificial hearts to drug-eluting coronary stents to apheresis equipment. But, I think this technology has the ability to help a lot more than 300 million people. When you start talking about preventing heart disease, in that case, now you're talking about what can we do to identify people with hypertension earlier and treat them. There was a beautiful study done a couple of years ago, published in the New England Journal of Medicine by a bunch of health economists at Columbia University. And they got into the data, and they showed that, if you treat people, when I got my doctorate, the high blood pressure was 100, anything over 90, 130 over 90, anything, the diastolic number 90. And now, and they went back and said, well, actually, if you medicate people with 90 and got them down to 80, you would save the healthcare system $10 billion a year in the United States. And so all these people that we thought were not actually hypertensive, if you medicate them and bring them down to 120 over 80 or slightly below that, you actually will have a huge economic benefit. We're talking about, simple diuretic pills, nothing, not fancy medications.
Right.
Just something that's worth like 10 cents a day, a pill worth 10 cents a day would save the healthcare system $10 billion a year. What we do is I've got to find those people. And so a better way to measure whether somebody actually has chronic hypertension would be incredibly cost-effective thing to do. And we can do that. I'm just not quite ready to talk about that part yet.
Right. No. I'm just want to make the point that there's a lot more on top of what you're looking at here in terms of the value that can be brought with the intellectual property that you own
Yes.
and the
I
systems.
believe, yes, I believe we could,
Backbone.
we could save the healthcare system around the world many tens of billions of dollars by doing a better job identifying people with hypertension.
Right.
Because all know, the way high blood pressure is measured now is by in the doctor's office after you walked up 3 flights of stairs, and so even if you have 120 over 80, the doctor says, well, you don't have hypertension, go home. You just because you're just because you're in the hospital in doctor's office, you have a high blood pressure. That's probably not true. Anyway,
They call that white coat pressures and white.
Yeah, white coat syndrome. Yeah.
Syndrome, right?
white coat hypertension. Yeah.
All right, well, George, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. We don't have any other questions. I just want to make a couple of quick additional announcements. The stock does trade in the U.S. on the OTC market. The ticker is VPTDF. And in the TSX Venture, it's VPT, 8 cents a share. I think it's a great entry point down here where you are and where you're headed. You can get additional information on the company from the company's website, which is www.ventripoint.com. And then we'll send you additional information on the company when we send out the feedback report. And we look forward to having you back on again real soon, George, when maybe when you have some of these next installation announcements, print some quarters and things like that. But we'd really very much like to have you back on today. And thank you so much again for your time today. It's really a great pleasure hearing more about Ventripoint and their Ventripoint VMS 3.0 system.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you for having me. I hope everybody has a safe and good day.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now, George. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.